So, Moose, this whole issue when it comes to the Impact World Championship, his I Quit match against Willie Mack at Genesis, what is going on? Because this past Saturday at Genesis, of course, the main event was Moose versus Willie Mack in an I Quit match. It was what the show was headlined by. It was really what everyone was talking about going into the show. I know there was lots of discussion about the Super X Cup tournament. We're going to be doing a video on that later today, so be sure to subscribe bottom right hand corner to make sure you get my thoughts on that. But what we are going to talk about here is the ending specifically for the I Quit match this past Saturday at Genesis, because somehow, someway, Willie Mack did defeat Moose in this I Quit match, but it's really the last closing moments of the match and therefore the pay-per-view that really have people talking as to what are the next steps with Impact Wrestling and what are the next steps when it comes to Moose, Rich Swann, and this Impact World Championship. So, this is what happened towards the end of the match, because after absolute bedlam and chaos in this I Quit match Saturday at Genesis, including, actually before we get to the closing moments, I don't want to talk about this, including Moose connecting with a go-to-how from the top rope to a table on the floor to Willie Mack, and I really can't do it justice with my words. You can see it on social media. If you go on Impact Wrestling social media, you'll very quickly find a tweet to it. Actually, we might actually put a link in the description box to see this tweet because it's absolute insanity. Basically, Moose has Willie Mack on the top rope. He hits the go-to-how, goes through a table on the outside. The table pretty much might as well not have been there because the spot itself was just pure insanity. The spot itself was absolute insanity because the table did nothing. Sometimes going through the table on a spot like that isn't necessarily a bad thing, which kind of seems a little bit crazy, but sometimes the table being there isn't necessarily a bad thing because it kind of stops the momentum of you just crashing and hitting the floor. It stops the momentum of you just, your body just thudding onto what is probably concrete underneath the mats at ringside. So the table there can almost actually cushion the fall, essentially. But Willie Mack, I think his legs sort of went through the table, but the back of his head and his back absolutely smashed onto the entrance ramp. It was absolutely brutal. Now, I know this was filmed back in November, so I don't know the status of Willie Mack. I don't know if they were fortunate to come out of that without a concussion. Fingers crossed. We haven't really heard anything. We haven't had any reports about injuries to Willie Mack or Moose for that matter, so I don't think they suffered anything from that spot. We'll have to wait and see, but man, it was an ugly spot. That was just on Willie Mack's side. So Willie Mack sort of goes through the table, but the majority of it, he hits his head on the entrance ramp and on the floor, which is just brutal. But on the other side of things, Moose doesn't go through the table at all through this go-to-how. He just lands on the outside of the ring, thud, just smack on the outside of the ring. Now, as I mentioned, they finished the match. They got through the finishing angle as well. So I would assume that they were both fine. But man, what a rough spot that was. Man, that looked so painful, so rough. Credit to them because the whole match really was that. The match really was absolutely brutal. And you have to remember, this is a pay-per-view without a World Championship match. This is a pay-per-view that was based around three real things. It was the I Quit match main event, the Super X Cup tournament, and the match between Jordan Grace and Jazz. That was all that was announced for the show. So I know this was an Impact Plus special event, but they really had to put on a show to entertain the people because, frankly, they needed to send the message, yes, we didn't have any major title matches on the show, but if you didn't watch, you missed something. And you did. So they had a fantastic match, but as I mentioned earlier on, it was the closing moments of the match that really had people talking, because after that spot, they trade shots in the middle of the ring. Willie Mack gets the upper hand with a stunner. Willie sends Moose crashing into a pile of steel chairs with a thunderous superplex. That, again, was an awesome spot. These are big guys. These are very, very big guys. These aren't small guys doing, crazy spots. These are guys that Moose is well over, what was he, 6'2", 6'3", 6'4". Got to be at least 250. Willie Mack isn't as tall as Moose, but he's certainly a heavy guy. He's a big guy. He can do crazy stuff, though. That's why I really enjoyed Willie Mack being the X Division champion. Even though he's a larger guy, some of the things he can do can actually just blow the mind. They really can. So they do that unbelievable spot. After the go-to-how on the outside, they do the superplex through the steel chairs in the middle of the ring, which was crazy. But that doesn't keep Moose from quitting, because Moose tells Willie Mack, look, you're going to have to kill me, as he hits him over the head with the TNA World Heavyweight Championship bout. Moose then looks to end Willie Mack's career. He wrapped a steel chair around the head of Willie Mack, and then what happens? Impact World Champion Rich Swann, he runs to the ring and he says, look, Moose, you've gone too far. You've gone too far. I know this is an I Quit match. I know you have a personal issue. I know that maybe you're doing this all to get to me and get to my Impact World Championship, but you've gone too far. You've absolutely gone too far. So what happens? Rich Swann offers Moose a shot at the Impact World Championship in exchange for sparring his friend. And Moose goes, that's exactly what I wanted. That's exactly what I wanted, because in a shocking turn of events, Moose accepts the offer from Rich Swann and utters the words, I quit. And that's it. That's the ending of the match. So Willie Mack technically won, but he really lost. The person who won here was Moose. Moose won by losing, which I really think is interesting. I think that's an interesting way for Impact to do it. I think that's absolutely an interesting way to do it. So it becomes apparent that all of this, and this is what I've been saying on the channel, if you've watched any of the preview and predictions I did for Genesis, if you've seen any of the videos when we've been talking about Moose and we've been talking about Willie Mack, you'll hear what I've said, and it was essentially confirmed here. This whole storyline, this whole feud with Willie Mack and Moose served one purpose, and that was to get Moose to face Rich Swann for the World Championship, and that's exactly what we got at Genesis. Because despite Moose losing, he really won here because he's got what he's always wanted, and that is an Impact World Championship opportunity at Rich Swann's Impact World Championship, because it becomes clearly apparent from that outcome at Genesis that all Moose wanted was a shot at the Impact World title, and he was willing to lose a pay-per-view main event to get just what he wanted. So the show went off the air with Rich Swann tending to Willie Mack in the ring, and we now know that at some point, we don't have dates, we don't have details, but we know at some point Moose will get an Impact World Championship opportunity. And this has always been the plan. The reason why we've spoken about it at length here on the channel is because it's been very obvious this has always been the plan ever since Bound for Glory. Look at the timeline, look at the series of events we have seen over the past few months. Moose beats EC3 at Bound for Glory. That's a massive, massive victory, and the purpose of that match and that feud was to elevate Moose to the next level and get him ready to become an Impact World Champion by defeating a former TNA World Heavyweight Champion. If you want to go further back than that, ever since Moose has been carrying around this TNA World Heavyweight Championship, this has been a vehicle to make sure that Moose is ready to eventually become the Impact World Champion. So Moose beats EC3 at Bound for Glory to get him ready for the next level. Coming out of Bound for Glory, we're told as a fan, we're told as an audience, Moose versus Rich Swann is coming at some point down the line. Now, previously, I thought that was hard to kill because that was the next pay-per-view after Bound for Glory, and I think most people would have thought that. On the post-Impact show after Bound for Glory, what did we have? We had Moose actually confronting Rich Swann backstage. Rich Swann was with the Rascals. They're congratulating him. They're saying, I can't believe you're the world champion. What an amazing story. What an amazing effort. Who interrupts him? It's Moose. It's the TNA World Heavyweight Champion. He has a bit of a verbal spar with Rich Swann there, and we're told as the audience, you know what, probably come hard to kill, Moose is going to challenge Rich Swann for that World Championship. That was the first thing that went off in my mind when I saw that. And going forward, then, who does Moose start to feud with? He starts to feud with Willie Mack. Why is that significant? Because Willie Mack is the best friend of Rich Swann. It's the same pattern that we saw over the summer last year when Eric Young had a brief couple of matches and feuds with Willie Mack. Why? Because that was to get at Rich Swann, because he had retired Rich Swann with the attack at Slammiversary and then the attack during Rich Swann's retirement speech, and then he had a few matches with Willie Mack because Willie Mack was trying to defend the honor of his best friend who was now retired. So it was the same process. It's the same storyline that we saw last year with Eric Young against Willie Mack. Now it's against Moose versus Willie Mack, and the whole thing was it was an effort to get to Rich Swann, and it was an effort to get to that World Championship. So this has always been the plan. To me, that was always the plan. You want to talk about even more on the timeline? Final Resolution. Rich Swann defeats Chris Bay for the Impact World Championship, retains it in the main event of Final Resolution. What's the last thing we see on that show? We see Moose in the ring. And what does he do? He hands the Impact World Championship to Rich Swann. Again, it's a sign Moose versus Rich Swann for the Impact World Championship is going to happen very soon. And I would have assumed, like most people, that was going to happen at Hard to Kill. The really interesting thing about Moose and about this Impact World Championship picture now is Kenny Omega. And it's this AEW Impact Wrestling relationship. Because I'd always thought that Moose versus Rich Swann was the plan for the World Championship. And it would appear with the events at Genesis and the events at Final Resolution and the events going way back to just after Bound for Glory, it was always the plan to have Moose face Rich Swann for that World Championship. That's always been the plan. But Kenny Omega's got involved now. Kenny Omega, the AEW World Champion, is involved. Don Callis, the Impact Wrestling Executive Vice President is involved, the Good Brothers, the Impact World Tag Team Champions, and possibly even the Young Bucks, the AEW World Tag Team Champions, are now involved. The Biz Clears is back together, but they're back together in AEW and Impact Wrestling too. Now, we know at Hard to Kill, instead of Rich Swann facing Moose, we're actually going to see Kenny Omega team up with the Good Brothers to face off against Rich Swann and the Motor City Machine Gun. So while Rich Swann still has this whole drama going on with Moose, and now he's promised Moose a future shot at the Impact World Championship, he's also feuding with Kenny Omega and the Good Brothers at the same time. And one of my big predictions for 2021 was that we're going to have Kenny Omega versus Rich Swann for the Impact World Championship, but also Kenny Omega is going to win the Impact World Championship. Now, I think what's curious about all of this is that, as I mentioned, Genesis and the most recent episodes of Impact Wrestling going up to Hard to Kill weekend, which is this weekend, they were all filmed back in November. Now, in November, we hadn't had any AEW and Impact Wrestling crossover as of yet, so I don't want to speculate too much on what was the editing process or the post-production process, but we know that Impact have had all this footage in the can since November, but after November, that's when the AEW and Impact Wrestling relationship came into full force. That's why they had to put those Kenny Omega and Don Callis and Good Brother interviews and vignettes into the show. They had to film them after the fact and then post-produce them into the show, which is kind of why I think it feels a little bit odd that we've got these two storylines going in parallel at the moment that both involve Rich Swann, because you've got one storyline, which is Moose and Rich Swann, that was always the plan, and then you now have the Kenny Omega storyline that Rich Swann's involved in too, and I think it's curious because I'm not sure, looking on the horizon, when is Moose and Rich Swann going to happen? When is that going to happen? Because I don't envisage Hard to Kill on Saturday being the last time that Kenny Omega and Rich Swann are in the same ring, because if Kenny Omega and the Good Brothers win on Saturday at Hard to Kill, which I think they will, we're going to be doing predictions and previews throughout the week, so we'll go into more depth on that at another time, but I think Kenny Omega and the Good Brothers will win at Hard to Kill, because why would they lose in their first match? I don't see that happening. So if they win at Hard to Kill, what are they meant to do then? Just go away? Is Kenny Omega not going to have another match in Impact Wrestling? No, of course he is. Of course Kenny Omega is going to have another match in Impact Wrestling. That's always been the plan, and we've seen multiple reports that back that up at this point. We've seen multiple reports that say Kenny Omega is going to be involved in future episodes of Impact. He's going to be involved in headlining future Impact pay-per-views. So Kenny Omega isn't going away. So after he wins in a match against the Impact World Champion, the next step is to go after the Impact World Championship. He's called himself a collector. So Kenny Omega competing for that World Championship is going to happen. But now, after Genesis, we're also told that Rich Swann is going to defend the title against Moose. It seems very complex, which isn't a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. Keeping the fans guessing about which direction they're going to head in when it comes to the World Championship picture isn't a bad thing. It gets people watching, it gets people talking. We're doing this video talking about it now. So that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's certainly a complex situation. What I am glad, though, is that Moose is still involved in this title picture. I would have hated to see, because of this AEW and Impact crossover, that Moose, his momentum and the growth that he has seen as a character, I would have hated to have seen that get dropped so easily and so quickly because of what's been happening with this AEW and Impact crossover. That would have been, I think, a bit frustrating, and that's not what we're seeing going forward. So it would appear that at some point we're still going to see Moose versus Rich Swann for that Impact World Championship. As of when, right now, we just don't know. Certainly isn't going to happen at Hard to Kill, unless they do an angle where Kenny Omega beats Rich Swann in that match and then Moose has the World Championship opportunity in terms of a cash-in. I don't see that. I don't see him having a briefcase or a contract. You can use it whenever you want, a Money in the Bank scenario, if you will. I just don't see that. As far as opportunities after that, well, I'm assuming we'll get more Impact Plus special events. So there's certainly a scenario where we could see it happen an Impact Plus special event. Would it happen on a future episode of Impact Wrestling? It's a possibility. If they want to draw big numbers, they can do it there. But you do have to look at this match, this storyline, Moose versus Rich Swann. This has been building ever since October, so I don't think they would just use it on a random episode of Impact Wrestling. Now, we don't know about TV specials. Maybe a TV special could be announced in the coming days and weeks. If so, that certainly could be headlined with a World Championship match at that point. I would suspect we're probably looking at the next Impact Plus event, which will see Moose finally face Rich Swann. And as I mentioned before, it's always been the plan, I think, to unify the TNA World Heavyweight Championship and the Impact World Championship, because that's the natural end of the TNA World Heavyweight Championship storyline. how else do you end it? Otherwise, you have to end it by Moose losing it, or one day it just disappears. And I don't think they would do that. I think the most natural way to see an end of this storyline is for Moose to win the Impact World Championship and then unify both titles. Or, of course, you could do Rich Swann versus Moose, both titles on the line, and then the winner gets both titles, and then the TNA World Heavyweight Championship is retired, because that's ultimately the end goal here. The TNA World Heavyweight Championship isn't going to stay around forever. It's not even a real active championship. It's a symbol. It's like the $1 Million Championship. That was held by Ted DiBiase. So it's a very complex situation. I'm sure we'll find out more in the coming days and weeks, especially as we come out of Hard to Kill. If I had to guess at this point, which is what I'm doing, I'm guessing here, I would probably say Moose versus Rich Swann happens at the next Impact Plus event. I just think that at the next pay-per-view, which I'm not 100% certain what that will be. It could be Slammiversary in July. They could do something in April. I'm not sure on that yet. It hasn't been announced. If it's in April, I could see Moose versus Rich Swann happen in April. But also, Kenny Omega's going to have that World Championship opportunity soon. I'm almost certain of it. I'm almost certain of it. And again, my big prediction for 2021 is that Kenny Omega will become the World Champion. How does Moose fit into that? It's very, very complex. It's very, very complex. As I mentioned, it's not a bad thing. It's certainly something we can continue talking about at length here on the channel, and it's certainly something that we're going to do. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on Moose losing the I Quit match to Willie Mack on Saturday at Genesis, but actually winning because he's now gained an Impact World Championship opportunity against Rich Swann in the future? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about Impact Wrestling, WWE, AEW, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So get involved with the community, drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube, go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.